During the 20th century, naval warfare underwent several revolutions. By the end of World War II, the most powerful ships afloat, aside from aircraft carriers, were battleships, and those were true steel beasts armed with massive artillery and protected by thick armor. However, by the dawn of the 21st century, the most powerful ships, apart from carriers, were missile-armed vessels. These ships carried guns no larger than 5 inches, usually in single mounts, and had little to no armor. Welcome, my name is RAMJB, and today we are diving into the naval revolution that reshaped the fleets in the 20th century. From guns to missiles. When did it happen? How did it happen? And most importantly, why did it happen? Stick around until the end and we'll investigate the answers to those questions together. In the meantime, if you like this content, remember to like the video, comment down below, share the video to someone who might like it as well. After World War II, it became clear that the carrier had become the true queen of the seas. Battleships, no matter how heavily armored or armed, couldn't survive air attacks without proper air cover. They also couldn't strike targets at anything close to the range at which carriers could project power. However, at that time, artillery remained the primary weapon for anything that wasn't a carrier. Guns were used both against enemy ships and for defending against aircraft. But times were evolving fast, and aircraft were also evolving into something really fast. The J-8s had arrived, and that had pretty much doubled the top speed of planes that might attack a fleet. Now that was a problem because anti-aircraft artillery was good enough for World War II, but with planes being so fast, there was a serious trouble. See, when you have an anti-aircraft mount, you need to rely on two things: that it can train side to side fast enough, and that it can elevate fast enough as well. Train and elevation rate. Train and elevation rates that were good for World War II standards were not nearly enough to try to track a fast jet coming in at top speed. Anti-aircraft artillery was no longer seen as effective against such fast-moving targets, so something had to change. And even worse than that, there was something new on the table: missiles. It all began on August 27, 1943. A formation of 18 Dornier Tu-17 bombers armed with Hensel Tu-93 glide bombs launched an attack on the Royal Navy's 40th Escort Group in the Bay of Biscay. These weapons, often known or referred to as glide bombs, they were actually early examples of anti-ship missiles. See, the Hensel bomb featured a rocket booster that accelerated the bomb for 10 seconds. Then it transitioned into a glide towards its target. The guidance system was primitive. It just was a flare mounted on the missile's tail that allowed an operator in the attacking aircraft to visually track the missile. Using radio commands, the operator would then steer the missile towards the target. While simple and primitive by today's standards, the system was effective. On that day, the 40th Escort Group suffered the loss of the destroyer HMS Egret, while HMCS Athabaskan, another destroyer, was heavily damaged. Few really knew at the moment, but that attack kick-started the Missile Age. It was the first anti-surface missile used in action, and for several months afterwards, those bombs really terrorized the Allied fleets. The Hensel bomb, alongside the Fritz X, they were responsible for sinking or severely damaging a significant number of ships. Of course, the most memorable victim was the Italian battleship Roma, which was sunk while en route to Malta. But there were many other incidents, and notable amongst them include the severe damage inflicted on HMS Warspite, the Brooklyn-class USS Savannah, the HMS Uganda, among many others. Ships targeted by these guided bombs could do little to defend themselves. Anti-aircraft guns were largely ineffective against bombs moving at such high speeds. They were too small, they were too difficult to spot, and they were almost impossible to aim at accurately. And the launching planes, well, they just remained beyond the range of anti-aircraft guns. Now, eventually, the German guided bomb threat was neutralized through the development of electronic warfare. The Allies identified the radio frequencies used to guide these bombs, and they deployed jammers to disrupt the signals. In addition, bombers carrying these heavy weapons, well, they were easy targets for Allied fighters. in particular given that the Allies had air supremacy in most theaters. However, it took nearly a year to fully counter this new threat, and by then the anti-surface missile had proven its value. Now, not long after, in April 1945, the Americans introduced what some consider the first true anti-surface missile. Unlike the German weapons, this one lacked a rocket booster. It was purely a gliding bomb. However, it had a major advantage. This was a true fire and forget weapon. It was equipped with its own active radar guidance system. You fired it, and it did the rest. After the war, this groundbreaking weapon became known as the ASM-N2 BAT. The so-called BAT bomb, as I said, entered service in April 1945, and it was used against the Japanese in the Pacific, and it had some pretty decent results. Of course, it was a new weapon and had some problems with maintenance and pilot training, operator training to use it properly, but when it worked really well. Actually, it worked so well that after the war it was kept updated and in service until I think the mid-50s. So really, a really good weapon, at least for the time. Now, after the war, the US tried to follow on this success by developing other anti-ship weapons, but things didn't go really well. There were several projects, actually none of them became operational, and that was because really the US Navy wasn't really interested in that kind of weapons. The main offensive weapon of the US Navy was the carrier and the aircraft of the carrier. Given that those aircraft could bomb anything, they saw no reason to look for a guided missile, anti-surface missile. However, after the war, there was another superpower, and that was the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union did have no carriers at all. So if they wanted to have any kind of long-reaching anti-ship weapon, they had to bet on something different. And that something different was the anti-surface missile. The Soviets, or rather Joseph Stalin in particular, well, they were fixed on building big gun warships, and that lasted well into the 50s. Battleships, cruisers, carriers, destroyers, battlecruisers, there was an entire lineup of designs intended to transform the Soviet Union into a dominant naval power. However, after Stalin's death, the harsh reality set in. See, the USSR simply couldn't afford to build all those ships. Besides, they didn't have shipyards to build those ships. Moreover, almost everyone, apart from Stalin himself, knew that such ships were already obsolete. As a result, this ambitious paper fleet, well, it never materialized, with perhaps one exception, and I'm looking at you, Sverdlovsk. The primary purpose of the Soviet Navy was to defend the USSR coastline from potential enemies. Or, said in other words, they needed to defend their coast from the US. Since the end of World War II, the US Navy had made no secret of its reliance on aircraft carriers as its primary offensive tool. Lacking carriers on their own, the USSR had to devise a way to engage, counter, and hopefully sink US carrier groups in the event of a conflict. Whatever solution they came up with needed to be long-ranged, powerful, and capable of penetrating the anti-air defenses of US carrier battle groups. And their answer was anti-ship missiles, large, powerful ones. Missiles like the SSN-1, the infamous SSN-2, infamous because a Chinese version became the Silkworm, and that got really famous during the 80s, and the SSN-3 became staples aboard Soviet warships. Meanwhile, air-launched missiles such as the AS-1 and AS-2 equipped Soviet aircraft. These weapons would define the Soviet approach to naval warfare in the years to come. The introduction of standoff anti-ship missiles forced the US Navy and all the NATO members, in fact, to rethink their defenses, because anti-aircraft guns were no longer going to carry it, far from it. Anti-aircraft guns have very limited range, and as we discussed before, their utility against fast targets was dubious at best. What was needed was something with long range, fast enough, and accurate enough to shoot down those missiles before they came close to the targets, and of course, hopefully before they were able to strike them. And in particular, if that target was a carrier, the need was dire. They really need something that could fight anti-ship missiles. Conversely, the Soviets also realized that, well, they also needed something like that because, well, the US didn't really have an anti-ship missile until the Harpoon in the 70s. But even before that, the main offensive weapon of the US Navy was the aircraft carrier and, as a result, planes. Given that those jets were going to be jet-powered and pretty fast, they also realized that anti-aircraft guns were no longer going to cut it, and they also seek something with range, speed, and accuracy: anti-aircraft missiles. Of course, there was a transitional period when older ships were refurbished to carry missiles. There are examples such as the Forrest Sherman class, the USS Boston and Canberra, several modified Cleveland class cruisers, and others. However, from that point onwards, every new ship built followed a similar pattern: one or two 5-inch guns, anti-submarine weapons such as ASROC or lightweight torpedoes, or both, and anti-aircraft missile systems appropriate to the ship's size, in the case of the US, the Talos, Terrier, or Tartar. Notably, true anti-ship capabilities were not a priority for US warships until the introduction of the Harpoon missile in the late 70s. And this was because the primary role of US warships was to protect the carrier, not to seek and engage enemy warships directly. On the Soviet side, well, a similar procedure went on. They also needed missiles, so they also began designing their ships in a very different way. Long gone were the big gun warships, and now they had missile warships instead. In the case of the Soviets, with a twist, because as they didn't have carriers, they needed to bring organically their own offensive power to the battlefield. And in the case of the Soviets, that was with the anti-ship missiles. As such, Soviet designs usually included a few naval guns, 1, 2, in some cases more. They also included anti-submarine weapons, and they also included some kind of anti-aircraft missiles. And when the ship was big enough and the missile was small enough to fit in that said warship, well, they also carried anti-ship missiles. As a result, by the mid of the 60s, the revolution was complete. The age of the big gun warship was gone and gone forever, and instead what we had was the beginning of a new era, the missile age. Well, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did so, please let me know in the comment section below. Also, let me know if you enjoyed this format. I intentionally kept this very simple, short, and straight to the point. I didn't include dates, stats, speeds, range, names, whatever. I just went to the point, the reasons behind the missile age revolution. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up. Comment down below. Remember, it helps a lot with the algorithm, and also I almost always answer, so yeah. Share the video with someone you think he can enjoy this content, and if you want to support me through other means, you can go through Patreon and support me there, or you can become a member here in YouTube. Link is down in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and see you later.